Hello there, you are listening to The Screen Queen, where you'll be finding your favorite movie or your favorite television show and learning something new. You'll just have to listen to find out. Here is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there, and welcome back to the show. As always, my name is Samantha Parrish, and you are listening to The Screen Queen. Welcome back to the second episode of Anniversary August. So this might shock a lot of my viewers, but I didn't grow up with Spider-Man, which I find to be incredibly ironic considering my last episode was where I talked about not growing up with Shrek. But the difference is, I didn't willingly run to Spider-Man when I first heard about the series. I've mentioned this before, but I have a phobia of spiders. So naturally, I put my context clues together as a little girl, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna tap out of this one. I don't think I want to willingly watch spiders everywhere. But getting to see all the trailers for the Sam Raimi films. And then I finally gave the movies a shot in my late teens, and Spider-Man eventually became one of my favorite heroes, which definitely put me in a heartfelt, hurtful condition to have to go back on my Batman days, but I just had to make room for more heroes in my life. And after getting to watch the Sam Raimi series, I had heard about the Mark Webb editions with the Amazing Spider-Man series. And from what I heard, people really liked it. So when Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, I was all set to go to theater. And after I saw the movie, I got to see how it aged these past 10 years, and it still surprises me to see the hate for this film. But I can see some of the criticisms of this film, but I also want to give a little bit more recognition to this forgotten sequel that felt like it was biting off more than it could chew. So get your web slingers out, because we're getting into The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So I'm pretty sure a majority of my listeners are familiar with the sequel to The Amazing Spider-Man, but it has been 10 years, so I want to give a plot refresher on The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So we're following Peter Parker as he's getting into his new established role as his alter ego, Spider-Man. And he's got everything going for him. He's getting a hold of his powers. He's got Gwen Stacy. They're about to graduate high school. And then Peter decides maybe it's best if he just goes it solo. Because naturally, you push away the people that you love than trying to work with them, that old plot. But there's about to be more room in Peter's life, because oh boy, here come the villains. There's a man that he once took pity on named Max Dillon, and he's got some problems. He's got some low self-esteem, and he unfortunately fell into a vat of electric eels and becomes Electro. But that's not the only issue. Norman Osborn has now passed away, and his estranged son, Harry Osborn, is back in the picture, so he's going to reconnect with his old best friend, Peter Parker. But we all know how that story goes between the friendship of Harry Osborn and Peter Parker. It's not going to end well. So, with everything I mentioned, I can see right off the bat why this was given the criticism of the plot. Over time, since The Dark Knight came out, there's been some tension about not concentrating on one villain at a time, because you want to get the whole motives, you want to get the feel of the powers, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up this movie's ass, but I felt like everything was established. For a film that has a 2-hour and 22-minute runtime, I felt like I got to know Electro, and I felt like I got to know Harry Osborn. Yes, they're entirely different plots, but they work to the advantage that I can feel that this would exist within a comic book of Spider-Man. But everyone knows why we are here, because this is the film where Gwen Stacy dies. The moment that is hailed as one of the most heartbreaking moments in comic book history. The angel in go-go boots. The love of Peter Parker's life is gonna die, and there's no way to go around this. Spider-Man 3 had attempted to bring in Gwen Stacy, but we all know how that went. So in this case, watching the trailer and seeing Gwen Stacy fall, it's like, okay, all right, now I know to bring tissues with me to the theater. I knew what I was getting into with this movie. I had known before I started the Spider-Man comics that Gwen Stacy died, so it was the $64,000 question. How is the most important moment of Spider-Man history going to be shown? So before I get into all the fun facts and the plot details and the commentary, I want to share a story about when I went to go see this movie. So, as I mentioned, I got to see this in theaters. I was with my friends Lincoln and Teresa. And when you know it, my bladder taps me on my shoulder right as the story progresses to the birth of Electro. But the bladder wasn't going to take it. It did not give a shit about me. And so as I'm running out, I see there is a father with his, what appears to be his 4-year-old child. And naturally, we're looking for the same thing. We didn't have to say a word to know we were all looking for the bathroom. And so I remembered where the closest bathroom was, and I pointed out, and this kid just took off. 4-year-old running past me, and I yelled out, "Run! Spider-Man needs you!" And I could hear his dad cackling in the background. It was kind of a funny moment for me to see the different generations that Spider-Man has slung his web to see the younger kids getting to go to the theaters to see him, and then even people like me in their 20s being able to go see Spider-Man, and it was just a wonderful, universal moment to see everyone coming together for Spider-Man. But then here's the end of the movie. That's something that was truly unforgettable for me. When the credits came up, the whole theater clapped in enthusiasm. That's why I don't have the harshest criticisms towards Spider-Man, while also seeing the criticisms towards Spider-Man. But I think about that whole crowd that clapped for this movie. This one theater in Virginia loved this movie. That whole theater would probably disagree with the criticisms. That being said, here's the first criticism I heard. The villains. Now, as I mentioned, I don't really have a criticism towards how they did Electro and Harry Osborn. Yeah, the Rhino was a bit of a stretch, but here's my deal. Spider-Man has always been a character that has too many things on his plate. There's a early panel in one of the comics that he did not know how to handle all of this, having to fight multiple villains while holding on to a job and going to school and doing all these things. He's an overworked guy. He is just fresh out of high school. When we look at the other heroes like, Batman, Superman, and I think there are a couple of Marvel ones that are Captain America, Iron Man, they're adults. They kind of got their shit together, but they don't have the same problems as Peter Parker. I mean, villains don't have a set schedule. They're just gonna go out and cause chaos. And unfortunately, people like Spider-Man that have a constant schedule where they have to fit in crime fighting with calculus homework, that's a lot. So him having to deal with Electro and Green Goblin and the Rhino, it does make sense to me. I mean, this is just a town that has way too many fucking villains and not too many heroes, is really what it comes down to. But here's the other thing. There was a possible Sinister Six film that was going to take place maybe about 2 to 3 years after The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and obviously we did not have that. We were teased a lot of stuff that would never come to fruition, but with the criticism being that there's too many villains in here, then how are people going to react to a film where Spider-Man had to fight 6 villains at the same time? We were just being coached to eventually get used to this type of environment where every time you turned around, there was going to be a new villain. Maybe Sinister Six was the closest we would ever get to having the environment of multiple villains versus one hero. Of course, we had multiple Spider-Mans in one movie. Maybe that's like a close second too, but still. We got what we got, and this was an attempt. And I did like what they did with Electro. Jamie Foxx did a solid performance as a villain. And he doesn't play too many of them, mostly because he's just too goddamn wholesome to play a villain. But when he does it right. And I have my thoughts about Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn, and that'll be my next point. I've heard not many positive things about Dane DeHaan's portrayal as Harry Osborn. I get it. Not all of them can be James Franco, and when Spider-Man comes back again, I'm sure we're going to have a different various form of Harry Osborn that just kind of has its own eras, just as we talk about Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland having certain eras. I don't mind what Dane DeHaan brought to Harry Osborn. When you look at the way James Franco was in the first 3 Spider-Man films and his whole evolution, they had to cram all of that story development with just maybe 1/3 of the film in this 2-hour time span. You went from falling in love with the way that he was best friends with Peter Parker to trying to figure out what is he going to do about dying from the same disease he inherited from his father, and then eventually filling in his father's glider and becoming Green Goblin in what is supposed to be close to the Green Goblin fiasco of the end of Gwen Stacy, and I'll get into that much later on. I think Dane DeHaan gets too much flack for how he had to fill in probably decades worth of material in 1/3 of the movie. And the chemistry he had with Andrew Garfield was, chef's kiss, amazing. During the time that Amazing Spider-Man 2 was really popular on Tumblr, there were pictures shared of the behind the scenes with Andrew Garfield and Dane DeHaan where they were like jumping around and they were giggling, and I felt that picture in all of its chemistry, just like I felt the chemistry within The Amazing Spider-Man 2. He does a very good job playing Harry Osborn and giving you these emotions of how he feels towards Peter. So it's going to hurt even more near the end of the film when you see this estranged best friend come back into Peter's life and feel like they never lost a damn day in time. And then all that shit's gonna go out the window by the end of the film. So he does bring the tragedy of Harry Osborn. It's a different tragedy, but a tragedy nonetheless. But there is one last mark I have about Harry Osborn, and this is just for me because I found this to be hilarious when I put the pieces together. So there has been a joke made by my friends about my type of guy because I like skinny men. Looking at Dane DeHaan, he definitely fits the bill. So the fact that he plays the Green Goblin, I literally fell in love with a goblin. Like, the jokes just kind of wrote themselves. It's a funny thing, but I could not help but share it. So, anyway, moving on. Looking at my notes, I think it's about time to get the hard part over with because I don't want to have to do this at the end. Let's talk about the death of Gwen Stacy. Like I said in the commentary about the trailer, that this is what people knew to expect, that there was going to be the most horrific moment in comic book history. And surprisingly, people took issues with that. When I first saw the death scene, I mean, it's every flavor of heartbreaking to see Peter lose someone he loved so much. Like, you don't see too many heroes fail or not save the day, especially if their own day isn't saved, because unfortunately no one is saving Spider-Man's day. No one. The thing that he wants to do is save the world and the people he loves in it, and unfortunately one of the people he loves dies in the world he's protecting. So I heard some complaints that it was too emotional. I've also heard complaints that it wasn't emotional enough. And I'm like, what are you talking about. It's very strange. People didn't find it to be very sympathetic. They just kind of made fun of it. They also made fun of the fact that the web looked like a hand, and I thought it was every grace of poetic to kind of feel it like, is this one hand extending like a last string of hope, per se? And when Gwen's head just hit the ground, oh, it was over. I mean, even talking about it still sends chills down my spine. I give so much praise to Emma Stone for what she did in this series. To bring Gwen Stacy to life, but then also bring the weight of emotions of the tragedy with her death. But here's the thing, though. Gwen Stacy had a very different plot in the original comic, and I don't know if many of my comic book friends know this, or the listeners to this episode, but yes, Gwen did die at the hands of Norman Osborn, but she also died at the hands of someone that she was intimate with. Yep. In the comic, she had an affair with Norman Osborn, and she was pregnant with his children. So Norman Osborn killed the mother of his children. It just, it hurts my gut having to say that. Like, no matter what I look at the comic version and the movie version, I still feel the tragedy. Both of them are different plots, but they have the same weight of loss, that no matter what you see it as, Peter Parker lost the woman he loved. This version of Spider-Man is the closest we're ever going to get with the death of Gwen Stacy. We might not have the actual plot of what happened, but her dying at the hands of Norman Osborn and Peter Parker sobbing over her is the moment that is hard to look at, and it's a moment that didn't need too much, but it had just enough, because the main part of it is the tragedy. We got to fall in love with Gwen Stacy in the first film, and now we have gotten to the point that we're never going to have her again. I mean, yeah, I'm sure we're going to have another various form of Gwen Stacy in the future, but we're not going to have the same one that Emma Stone played, and she did the most tragic scene the best justice. Everything about this moment is what comic books are about, and these two did bring that to life. It might not be exactly what you want, but when you strip away the comic version and look at how they had to do the most hard moment in comic books, you give a little less grief to Mark Webb. But that does bring me to the end of the story. Personally, I mean, I feel like the story ended with Gwen Stacy. Like, the person I love is gone. I don't know if I want to see what else is left, but I can kind of see where people are a little mad at this movie because of the ending. So, when Peter has to take his time away from saving the world, that includes having a weird snowfall in summer, New York logic, I guess, Peter gets back into business, and he stops a young boy dressed up as Spider-Man so he could take back on his role as Spider-Man and save the world from the Rhino. Now, that's actually not what had people mad. The real thing was the alternative ending to Spider-Man. Originally, it was still going to have Peter at Gwen's grave, and then who's behind him but the dad that he was told was dead for years, Richard Parker, who's supposed to be dead in an airplane like we saw in the beginning of the movie. That's just bonkers. Like, I can kind of get behind that a little bit because of the way Andrew Garfield played Peter Parker with this, shock. I mean, shit, if I found out my dad, who was supposed to be dead, is alive, I would be a little, haywire with my emotions, too. I wouldn't know how to fucking feel. And that just didn't fit, really. I can see it as a moment with Richard Parker to be something different, but it just was too different. But then you have the ending that we got with him fighting the Rhino, and it just didn't make people agree. So it makes me wonder this. what if The Amazing Spider-Man 2 had an entirely different ending? Now, on top of my head, I can't think of how that would go. I would think it would lead in with something about the next villain, which, well, we kind of got teased with Harry Osborn talking about, like, the next villains, but all we got was suits of villains that we were never going to see after the cancellation of the Garfield series. It could have had another various way to get him to get the suit back on. Something along those lines. That would have been a lot better than what felt shoehorned, or should I say rhino-horned, or the dead ending. Like, no matter what, people just were not happy with whatever ending. So, who knows? Maybe there is something out there of different revisions of the ending, considering we already had 2 endings planned and one of them went through and both of them didn't go. But maybe that's where the next film series is going to come through, and we'll get something that honors both of those plot lines to the decency that the fans would want. But before I end this episode, I have one last story to tell. So I got my family involved with the Spider-Man series. Both my mom and my grandfather, that I call Papa, they knew only of the Tobey Maguire series. I caught Papa on many occasions watching the Tobey Maguire one, and that's actually why I grew to have a soft spot for Spider-Man. But when my mom heard about it, she's like, I don't know if I like this guy. And then I showed her the first film, and she's like, oh man, I like this guy. And I ripped the Band-Aid off immediately when I told her there was a second film and that the character Gwen Stacy would die, and she goes, no, they can't do that. I'm like, Mom, it's been done for like 30, 40 years now. Like, there's no way to unwrite comic book history. But was my mom prepared for it? No. Was my grandfather prepared for it? Also no. When I showed my grandfather, oh, it was so hard. When the death scene happened, Papa just went, she died? And I went, yeah. And he goes, how did that happen? Oh, obviously, she broke her fucking neck. And I didn't say it like that. And I explained that she fell and broke her neck. And he just goes, no. I went, yeah. And he went, how did that happen? And I'm like, I can't keep doing this. The most tragic scene. And I think my grandfather felt what everyone else did back when the comic came out. But here's the thing. Because of the way that my mom and my grandfather have reacted to comic book films without a knowledge of comic books, it's made me appreciate them more. There are so many criticisms that I've seen about this film because it's constantly compared to the comic, and like, I get it. You want to see the things that you read about to be on the screen and feel like it was ripped from the pages. And unfortunately, you know as well as I do, that's not always the case. We're going to have to take what we can get or see if we get another various form in the future. But with this series being called an authentic Spider-Man series, I do feel it is authentic. I felt Peter Parker truly emanated what was in the Amazing Spider-Man comic series. And the story of Peter Parker has resonated with people that even aren't comic book fans. If it can be loved by someone like my mom and my grandfather who aren't comic book fans, then who am I to judge others? Not every film is going to be gold, but there's always something to appreciate. And now that 10 years has passed for Amazing Spider-Man 2, I still find the things to appreciate about it, and I always will. And I hope talking about this movie has relieved a little bit of the flaws in this film, because every film's going to have flaws. Peter Parker has flaws, and that's perfectly okay. It's not going to be a golden film, but it still worked for people. It worked for that whole theater full of people that clapped for this movie that probably didn't see the criticisms and just wanted to enjoy the story of Spider-Man. I mean, the story did dip its toes into many different parts of it, but it's still entertaining nonetheless. It still is going to entertain no matter how many years go by. And I hope in the years to come that this film will be given a little less flack over the years and can truly see for how amazing it truly is. And that, my friends, is going to be a wrap on The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This was a hell of an episode, but I really enjoyed it. I really like getting the chance to talk about comic book films. I don't get too many chances to talk about it, so I take what I can get. But now is the time to figure out what the next episode is going to be on the Screen Queen. So, we have 3 more episodes of Anniversary August. So let's see what number 3 is going to be. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but here we are. Okay, wait, go back in there. Don't fall. Okay, I got one. Motherfucker. Okay. I can be down for this one. That one sounds great. So, the next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be the Swan Princess. Oh, I can feel the comedy already for this next one. Alrighty. Well, if you would like to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. If you want to share with me about your favorite moment from Spider-Man or how much you cried during Gwen Stacy's death, I'm all ears for that conversation. And if you would like to listen to your favorite media queen on an easier outlet, I am now available on YouTube, where you can catch all of the episodes on there. It's a much easier time, and I like things to be easy. Who doesn't? And lastly, I wrote a book series called Inglorious Inc., and you can find the book series and its prequel, The Company of Crime, available on Amazon, but I have that bad boy in the description box. Alrighty, you all take care now and stay amazing. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!